Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I am going to share with you the books that I read in June and July. I have 4 books to talk about. I read a lot more than that, but most of what I read in those 2 months were books for the Booktube Prize, so I will link the video that I have already made reviewing and talking about those 6 books. So these are the non-Booktube Prize related books that I read over the past couple of months. So the first book, I read this back in June, so my details on it are slightly fuzzy by now, but thankfully I did make some notes. I read The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayr. It's about a sleeping car porter, so someone who basically takes care of people on the sleeping car or the portion of the train that is for like overnight journeys. This is set in the 20s or 30s, and this was a job, a very hard job that was typically given to Black men, and they worked quite grueling hours and could very easily lose the job. So we follow a porter named Baxter. He is a porter for the sleeping car, and so basically it's his job to take care of the needs of all the people on the sleeping car overnight during this journey. This is supposed to be Baxter's last trip. He's been a porter for, I forget how long, but he has been saving up money to go to dentistry school. This should be his last trip. By the end of this trip, he should be able to save up enough money to quit his job and go to dentistry school. The last trip is supposed to be, I think it's 3 days, but things happen that end up delaying, extending the trip. So he is just like working all this overtime, working all of these extra days, and the sleeping car porters don't get much sleep as it is anyway. And then to extend that, he's basically working all of these days with virtually no sleep. If any of the passengers make a complaint, then your direct supervisor can give you demerit points, and if you get a certain number of demerits, you can lose your job. So Baxter is in this position where he needs to do this last trip to save up the money, but he's worried that if he racks up any more demerits, that he won't be able to do that he'll lose this job before he can save up enough. And of course, as you can imagine, being a Black man with like basically no rights, working a job that people treat as very as like a menial job, you can earn demerits for the stupidest reasons. So he's navigating that situation, and he's also just navigating the world as a Black gay man. So he has these 2 marginalized identities. One of them, obviously, he can't hide the fact that he's Black. The other identity, as a gay man, he has to hide. Otherwise things will go very, very badly for him. So that's what the book's about. I think this was a case of this being a really good book that was not my type of book or type of storytelling or type of, I don't even want to say type of writing, because I think the writing was good, and the writing was good to me. Like, I remember certain bits of the novel where I was like, oh, that's really beautifully put, or very creative, or just, I remember thinking very positive things about the writing. So I don't necessarily think it was the writing. I think it was the style and how the story was told that I didn't vibe with. I still gave it 3 stars. I liked it well enough. And I think for the right reader, this could be an excellent read. I really liked all of the different characters. You have this cast of characters, these passengers. They all have their weird quirks and eccentricities. And it was just really cool to see this little microcosm of society. This is Baxter's world. These people are his world for the next 3+ days. So I thought that part was a really interesting part of the novel. I think the part that I didn't like, or what made the book not work as well for me, is the fact that it's written in this very kind of like fluid, dreamlike, slightly confusing way, which I typically don't get on with. I know, obviously, it was purposeful. Baxter is running on severe sleep deprivation, and this dreamlike quality is supposed to mimic his headspace and give the reader the feeling of the confusion and almost the incapability of remembering what's real and what's not. It becomes the line between reality and dream and imagination becomes very blurred. So that fuzziness, that confusion, I think served a purpose. I just typically don't like that kind of storytelling. I like things to be slightly more clear cut, I guess. So that was a taste issue, but I do think the writing was really, really good. And like I said, I think the characters were really interesting. So that was The Sleeping Car Porter. The other books, I am just going to give little snippets of my thoughts because we have a classic that I don't think needs a whole lot told about it, and then a couple of sequels that I don't want to spoil. So let's start with the classic. I read Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. I read Huckleberry Finn years and years ago. And I remember the gist of it, but not a lot about it. And I wanted to read James by Percival Everett sometime this year, hopefully. But I'm going to, I think, reread Huckleberry Finn. I don't think, from what I've heard from other people talking about James, I don't think you have to reread it. But I think I would prefer to have that story more fresh in my mind. So I put a hold for it. And then when I put a hold for it, I noticed that Tom Sawyer was available through my library's audiobook app. And I've never read Tom Sawyer, so I thought, well, why don't I just read this one first while I'm waiting for the other hold to come through? So I did that. I really enjoyed it. I typically prefer stories that have maybe not a traditional arc, but that have a plot and a story. I typically don't like books that are vignettes, although there are exceptions. And I don't think this book necessarily is in vignettes. I think there is a bit of a plot, but a lot of it is just, here are the different adventures or mishaps that Tom Sawyer finds himself in. And that worked for me. I think I am drawn to those rapscallion, rough around the edges type of child characters. So Tom Sawyer totally fit the bill, loved him as a character. He's really mischievous, but really endears himself to the reader, or at least he endeared himself to me. So I enjoyed it. I think the only thing that hampered my enjoyment, and I was aware that this was going to be the case ahead of time, was the use of slurs, which just, as you're reading and enjoying the story and having a good time, just kind of smack you in the face a little bit, where kind of jolts me out of the story. And I understand the time at which, or during which, this book was written, but it doesn't make the slurs any less potent, especially when you're listening on audiobook and your ears are kind of assaulted with these horrible words. That was unfortunate, but I was at least prepared for that. The other two books I read this month, I will not really get into because they are sequels, but I read both Catching Fire and Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This is book 2 and 3 in the Hunger Games trilogy. I read the Hunger Games for the first time in 2020, I think it was, and kicked myself that I had never read it before because I thought it was great and I totally understand the hype. I don't read a ton of YA, and YA rarely works for me, but I do find those gems, and Hunger Games is one of those gems. And I thought the trilogy as a whole really works well together. Sometimes when you have series, they can kind of peter off. I do think the first two books are stronger than the third. I gave Hunger Games and Catching Fire 5 stars. Mockingjay, I think I gave 4 stars. It's still really, really good, just not quite as good, so I couldn't help but compare. But I think if you take the trilogy as a whole, I think it's a 5-star trilogy. I love the characters. I think the characters get really, a lot of them get really fleshed out. I think the plot over the entire trilogy is really well done. I think the pacing is superb. I love how she continues to build the world through the trilogy. I think it had a really good conclusion as well. And the only way the third book suffered, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. It was just a tiny little bit that made it not quite as good. And this is mild spoiler territory, so you can stop watching now if you don't want to get spoiled. Very, very mild spoiler. But in the third book, because of an event that happens in the second book, you already know going into the third book that there's not going to be, that the games are not going to occur. So you get the Hunger Games in books 1 and 2, and you do not get any Hunger Games in book 3. And maybe this sounds terrible because the games are terrible, but the games are also the most riveting part of the books. How brutally creative they are is interesting to read about. And so the fact that there were, fortunately, no Hunger Games in the third book also makes it slightly less interesting, at least for me, than the first 2 books. So that sounds horrible, but that's just reality. But like I said, the third book I think is really strong. I love the characters in it. I think I got attached to quite a few of the characters. So yeah, overall, a great reading experience. Those are the books I read in June and July. If you've read any of them, have any thoughts about them, please leave a comment below. Thank you as always for watching, and we'll chat soon. Take care. Bye.